He's a well-bred ass, you can see it in his stride, and for a copper penny he will let you take a ride. That's my kind of tomfoolery right there.
And with that, welcome to this episode of the 800's. I am your host, Alex, and you just heard from my co-host, Adam. And behind the scenes, we have our tech man, Alan. And now for a couple little plugs.
Oh, yes. So if you joined us during the little before the show thing, you heard Fearless First by Incompetech. That's incompetech.filmmusic.io. It's where we get all of our super duper awesome music. Also, most of our books we listen to on audio, and we get them from Audible. And if you want to check Audible out, go to dmstable.com/audible for a free 1-month trial. And of course, this is a video book club, so we post all of these on YouTube as well as some other videos. So check out our YouTube channel, which is the DM's Table. And also, if you're joining us on YouTube, feel free to put in comments on that video to continue the conversation, and we'll try and reply and keep the conversation alive. We love talking about books, and this is one of my personal favorites, so I'd love to talk more and more and more as more of you guys check us out.
And as would I, because this week on the 800's, we'll be discussing The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Dewey Decimal Designation 813.622. Published in 2007, it is his first novel in the Kingkiller Chronicles, which are incomplete as of the streaming of this episode. The second book is out, The Wise Man's Fear. Third is yet to come. The Name of the Wind itself, though, takes place in the fictional world of Temerant, where magic exists, demons lurk in the shadows, and the Fae cross from a parallel world in the light of the full moon. Yet Pat's novel begins in the middle of nowhere, a rural town in the middle of nowhere. Here, we meet the keeper of the Waystone Inn, Cote. And after a chance encounter with demonic spider-like creatures known as Skrael, Cote rescues a man known as the Chronicler. The Chronicler is a rare man of letters in this world who has come seeking stories, specifically that of the infamous Kvothe. Little did he know that his very savior was the same man. This is where the story truly begins, and in Kvothe's own words, the only story that matters.
So that's the story we'll be talking about tonight. And if you're joining us for the first time, let me give you a quick explanation of how things roll around here. Alex and I will come up with a topic or question to talk about, and we'll talk about it amongst ourselves for a minute or two, and then we'll keep an eye on the chat to see if you guys have any input on it. So feel free to give a comment, and we'll talk about whatever you guys put in there. And as well, if you want to talk about something specifically, feel free to give it a shout out in the comment section. And we'll try and keep an eye on that and respond in turn.
Also, keep in mind that this is not meant to be a kids show. We aim it towards adults. We cover adult themes and topics, and while we try not to rely on swearing, we don't necessarily shy away from it either. So we're trying to build a supportive and fun community where people can share their interests. And if you're taking away from that, we're going to kick you out. So in short, be nice or fuck off.
And with that, let's get right into the conversation. What was your first impression of the book, Alex?
Oh, so many questions from like the first word, because it starts off with a piece of lore, and I love when books start off with a piece of lore that gets me hooked on it, and I'm just like, how is this going to play out? What is this going to do? Who's that guy? Why is he important? Where is it going? Why is he there? And as soon as there's a lot of questions to answer, it's so much more fun to start reading the book and let those answers play out. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I gotta agree that first chapter, the Silence of Three Parts, that really kind of feels like a fantasy story. Like it puts you in that mindset of, all right, this is a whole nother world. Let's check out what it has. So
Mhm.
it is a really cool feeling. For me though, like I held off my impression until the story starts, right? The first little bit of the book is Coat and is in setting up the now storyline, and we're finding out a whole bunch of questions with zero answers, and it promises so much more. So it's a good hook, if you ask me. It's something that if I wanted to write a story, I definitely would use. Is that, let me tell you what the end is, and let's go back to the beginning and discover why that's cool. So yeah, I was definitely hooked right away.
Well, VS Drake actually mentioned in our chat here that he thought the start was super over the top, and then apparently Goosebumps was over the top. May not be the worst way to describe it, but I think that kind of sets a precedent for a lot of what happens in this book. Is just there's going to be over the top stuff that happens. He I'm not sure whether or not, and maybe VS Drake can clarify this a little bit, but I'm not sure if he thinks that was a good or a bad thing. The goosebumps seem to imply good, but I don't
Yeah.
know. Dramatic. That's what he meant. Yes. But I think that kind of gets into one of the things that I really noticed and thought gave this book extra value was that this is a storyteller's story. There's a lot of stuff that is made specifically for people who like telling compelling stories that may not necessarily have all the same components as people who are, say, great world builders or people who are great with characters. But this is just a great story, and story has, well, drama, because
Yeah.
like we're human, and as much as people like to say they hate drama, we love it. Like on some level, we may not like all the same kinds of drama, but there's something that we're into about it. And is there, you know, as what do you feel were some of the biggest parts of literary value brought by this book?
uh well, for me, the main thing that comes to mind when I think about The Name of the Wind is it a novel in its own? Because if you think about it, and you definitely correct me if you see something that I don't see here, but it's part one of a three-part book. It's not book one of a three-part series. It's it's like, to me, there's no story that is just this book. It is um it's the start of the story. There's nothing that starts and ends in the book.
Yeah, I actually have to very much agree with you there. I don't think that it is, even though it may be classified as a novel, I don't think it is a novel because there is no story arc. This is the beginning. This is not
Yeah.
the there is no actual story arc. There's a lot of stuff that happens to our main character involved, but there is not a lot that comes of his own actions that has to be resolved, that creates a true overarching story. There's just, it's almost episodic. It's just one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, but it's setting up for something much bigger. And I don't necessarily dislike that, but I don't think it could I don't think it actually has the same qualities that a lot of novels do, where there's, your typical beginning, middle, end. This is just kind of almost stair stepping us to something bigger.
Yeah. I like Alpac Phantom says there are things that happen start to finish, but it's not a fully satisfying overall story. That's kind of what I'm alluding to. Like, for me, a novel including novels that are part of a series, I think should be standalone stories. So, like, I don't think you can pick up Wise Man's Fear and read it without first reading The Name of the Wind, because you need to know about Quoth's tragic childhood. You need to know about his time in what was it, Tarbean. You need to know about his beginnings in the university, and to me, that's just not something that this book and this series does well. But at the same time, like, I mean, like I said at the beginning, this is one of my favorite books. So it's
Well, I think part of it is it's a product of the way in which the story is told. Is you have to remember is this is Quoth sitting down over a 3-day period telling a story.
yeah,
Like this is, and the Name of the Wind is day one. That's it. Like
yeah,
so, I don't. It's hard to find that satisfaction that Outback Phantom was talking about because we know there's something bigger. We're at. It's like you said. We're at the end. We know what it has come to that point, and we want to get there. But you don't get that resolution. You get, like you said, the setup stuff. And while there are conflicts and things that are resolved, there's not that big payoff, like to use probably one of the most famous examples, like the Sorcerer's Stone. The big payoff being they found the Sorcerer's Stone,
yeah,
but there is technically something overarching there, and that's defeat of Voldemort. That this story doesn't have that. Yeah, and VS Drake is right. It's a completely different series, but I did that on purpose, is I wanted to find something that juxtaposed it like completely differently, like, and they are meant to be read differently is my point. And I think that's why we can still enjoy it despite it not having that typical structure.
yeah. So a point in its favor, right? So the typical structure that I'm talking about when I say all this stuff we've been talking about here is you have that underlying theme that builds through the entire book to this giant crescendo that comes crashing down and makes you feel one thing. Where The Name of the Wind makes you it doesn't it doesn't build up, peak, and then come down. It holds you at this one level of interest where it's like, oh, this story is really cool. Oh, this story is really cool too. Oh, this part's really cool too.
And you do, and it's not even just cool. It's like, this story's really cool. And then, oh, that story hit me right in the feels. Ooh, that was brutal and ugly and really, really cringy. There's a lot in there. And actually, I think that's one of my favorite parts about Rothfuss' writing style is his ability to describe places, people, but most especially, I love his ability to express emotions and experiences, what it's like to really be in a moment with a character. And, there are very few authors that have made it so easy to just put myself in their shoes and experience that moment and not even think I'm guessing at it, but to really feel what they're feeling. And it's intense and I love it.
Yeah.
Did you get any out of that, or is that just me? Anybody else get that?
I'd say I'd agree with that. Rothfuss is really good at building a world through his character's eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something I think we mentioned in our first stream. Was Sanderson's really good at building up characters through the world. Rothfuss is really good at building a world through characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually one of the points that I wanted to really talk about is the fact that this story is, well, a majority of this story, aside from the little interludes in the very beginning, is told by a character. And one of the things I want to talk about is this idea of the unfaithful narrator. How much of this story is true, especially when it's coming from a character who is by nature a storyteller and somebody who has in the book talked very specifically about creating lies about himself to create a reputation. Like, so how much do we believe in this story? And does that take away from this, or does it add to it?
That's definitely a good question that I think you have to ask yourself every point while you're reading this story is like, okay, did he make that up? Did that really happen? Were there 20 men? And he definitely said, like Bast was like, don't lie to me. I'm like mostly sure this was in the Name of the Wind and not Wise Man's Fear. He was like, don't lie. You got to tell the truth. And he was like, this is my one and only opportunity to tell the truth. Of course, I'm going to be truthful about this. So, yeah, I agree with V.S. Drake. I trust him. He's telling the truth.
I agree to a degree. I think that the vast majority is truth, but I think there's a part of him that just, because of his personality, that can't help embellishing certain things. Like, one of the things that I've noticed throughout the story is just how infallible he is when he attempts to do something, except when it comes to girls in the beginning anyway. And even then it gets played off like I was the innocent. I totally didn't mess this up because I was trying to do something else and something bad came of it. I think most of it is true. I just think he might be tweaking little details here or there to make him seem, to maybe take away from the parts that are a little bit embarrassing, that don't necessarily outright change the story. They just change maybe your perception of him slightly.
So let me ask you this then, to riff off that. What are Quoth's character flaws?
Oh God, the arrogance, man.
The arrogance, the massive arrogance.
Oh man, and I think this idea of the fact that he thinks he is so special that he is above how the world works. And I do like that comes back to bite him in the ass a few times. So I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing that we have a protagonist that I honestly at times have trouble liking, because arrogance is like one of my pet peeves personally, and I sometimes have trouble liking him as a protagonist because sometimes I just want to slap him upside the head and just say, get your head out of your own ass.
Yeah.
And
to riff off what Elpac Phantom said,
yeah,
he's upset with the stories that are out there already about him. He's definitely got that perfectionist air. I don't think he ever says it when he's narrating his story, but I think it comes across very strongly that he doesn't like to do things not 100%.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Like, at least when he puts his mind to something, like there's definitely stuff that he just doesn't care about, so he doesn't put the effort in. But if he's going to put the effort in, he's damn well going to give it everything. Yeah, V.S. Drake, yeah, he's a showman, very much so. And Outback Phantom does make a good point. He does already have the fame. I don't think it's the fame he wants so much as, like you said, putting the record straight a little bit. And when you're putting the record straight, even if you're putting it straight, you still probably want to hide things that you find personally embarrassing. Like, so I'm not thinking that he's lying about big stuff. I just think that there might be little things here or there that try and paint him in a better light than necessarily he is, because I think he is a more flawed character than he lets on. And, that's kind of how showmen in general tend to work. At least they have a persona and they want that to survive, maybe above even who they really are. To what extent that's happening here, I'm not exactly sure, but I also don't think he's lying about anything that is actually fundamental to how he wound up where he is and what happened throughout the course of his life. Just little things, like maybe he was a bit more of an asshole than he lets on. And he's
Well,
already sometimes a bit of an asshole.
that's the big problem with this story type, right? Is he's telling his story, so it's all from his filtered eyes. So if he doesn't think he was an asshole, then he's not going to say he was an asshole.
That's a good point. And V.S. Drake makes another good point, is that we do have to remember that in the context of this, there is some
Naivete.
naivete. That's the one I was thinking. Yeah, there's some naivete there because in the story, he's what, 12 to 16? I think that's as old as he gets in this book. I can't remember if he makes 17 or not by the time
I can't
this book ends.
I always forget because he lies about his age.
Yeah, but either way, he's a teenager, presumably. Anyway, at least there's enough of a reputation there that when Chronicler goes to the university, it's not debunked. So, and if it was going to be debunked anywhere, it would probably be there. There is some naivete there that comes into the story for sure, but we also have to remember that the person telling the story is an adult without that naivete that he had when he was 15. Some of the mistakes he makes are definitely the mistakes of a teenager, and that's all well and good. There's just some things that I was thinking, like, even for a sophisticated teenager, like, that's just probably not how that would have played out.
Yeah.
If we're being honest. And those are the types of things where I don't think they fundamentally change the end game of a given situation. They might have just fudged a few of the details of how it got there, so it makes him look a little bit better because he's embarrassed about stuff he did when he was 15. Like, don't tell me none of you have ever, like, told a story about yourself when you were a kid and kind of skipped over a little part that you didn't like either. I know I definitely have.
I've definitely done some silly things in my teenage years. I mean, even in my 20s, right? As a proud 31-year-old here, I like, even if he's only 20, 25 right now, he probably has some naivete in his blood still.
True. Yeah. I mean, like, if I look back at my 25 year old self, there's definitely plenty still there. But a part of that also comes with world experience, and presumably he's had a shit ton of world experience since that point too. But well, one of the things I also wanted to talk about as far as the things that I love about this book and what it brings to the table is the magic system. What did you think of it, Adam?
So it's kind of cool how Rothfuss designed two different systems, right? You got the sympathy and you've got names. I think it's kind of neat to have, like, to take Quoth's perspective from it. Sympathy isn't really magic, it's just knowing how things work. I thought that was kind of neat how it's like you've got this low level magic that's really, really useful for everything you could think of. And then you've got this other magic that's godlike power. What did you think?
Well, I'm definitely with Alpac Phantom and V.S. Drake. It is dope, and I loved it. As far as the sympathy goes, because it is so interesting how those two magic systems work when you know how they work. Because sympathy involves putting your mind through these various exercises in which you essentially separate parts of your mind from itself. Like, and one of the things they talk about in this story is like the doors of the mind. And I wonder if that's kind of like a world trait thing, or if that's something that is, exists in this world that we might be able to try. I don't know if I'm the only one or not, but I definitely tried some of those mental exercises, and boy, is it hard. I don't think I can do it.
Well, I
But
think that's the point, right? Is it's meant to be impossible unless
yeah,
you're
but
one of the 1% or whatever that can do sympathy.
well, exactly. And but I love like VS Drake said, it's kind of there's a science element to it, and it gets broken down as a science. That's why it's so useful with everyday things, and it makes it so much more relatable. It's less high fantasy and more what if this world was just a little bit different, you know?
Yeah,
And
it's not. So then the magic happened and the cool things did stuff. It's so then this very specific thing happened. We bound this twig to that tree and we made it fall over.
it drew its power from this exothermic source, and that
Yeah.
power when that power runs out, this runs out, and it yeah, via strict mention, it is very physics based, and it is so cool to watch that happen uh, in a very practical sense. And then you have something that it works in the completely, almost a completely opposite, but I don't think as unrelated as some people might think way of names. Names, I need to be careful here because I have read the second book and I need to make sure that I'm not getting too much into that one. But names operate as a way of knowing the true nature of something. And I think that could possibly be, and this is maybe just a little theory of mine, another door in the mind where names exist and your ability to access this door. I do know they go a bit more into this as a concept, but not specifically as a door in the next book. But uh, so I'll stop there as far as that goes. But I do like that exists as something that is kind of just a general understanding of the full nature of something as opposed to the specific reactions between things. And I don't think they're as disparate as being completely disconnected and completely opposite, but they are kind of two sides of the same coin almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so the safe comment is
Safe for spoilers or
well, yeah. The name of the wind comment um we know that when Quoth speaks the name of the wind near the end of the book, he goes into this trance-like existence
Mhm.
where he gets trapped in a state where he just can't control his thoughts anymore. So to go with your doors in the mind thing, he opened the door and went into a completely different room and got trapped there until Elodin opened the door back up and let him come back out. So
Exactly. And I I was really surprised that I missed it. Like this is my second read through. My first read through, I completely missed the whole Doors of the Mind thing, and I have no idea how I did that. Also, shout out to VS Drake. I love Elodin too. He's probably like my second favorite character behind Ari, which we'll get to eventually. Uh,
well, let's throw that out. Let's talk about characters real quick. Who is your
all right,
favorite character?
Ari is my favorite character. Has been like since she was introduced. I like that she is she's kind of she she is the antithesis almost to Quoth in a lot of ways. She's calm. She doesn't care about the material, the materialistic parts of the world. She just kind of is herself, and she brings a calm that brings out, I think, some of the best that we see in Quoth. Something that we don't see after his family's murdered. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. The way I like to describe Ari is in comparison to Quoth. Quoth lives to be seen. Ari lives to see.
That is an excellent way to put it. And I know this contradicts what I said about the materialism thing, but yeah, what did you bring me tonight is one of her favorite quotes. But the thing is the stuff that he brings her is never just the thing. It becomes its own entity to her. She sees what it is. So.
I'm sorry, just go ahead. Phantom, I'm partial to Manette. Meta-wise, Phantom played Manette, a Manette character in D&D, so...
Yeah. Yeah, specifically in Roll with Advantage, which is the original flagship show that preceded the 800's and DM's Tables. So if you want to go check out our DM's Tables version of Manette, you can go over to Roll with Advantage after this.
Never stop
plug. always be branding.
Manette is definitely a cool character.
He is.
And something I love about Rothfuss's characters, and one of the reasons why I strongly say Rothfuss builds a world from his characters, is they're all relatable somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we all have met a Manette. We all know somebody who lives to learn and just loves to go out there and experience as much as they can in a safe university environment.
Yeah, and as gruff as he is, he's really just cares about learning, but he's willing to take care of the people who also care about the things that he cares about. And he's got a surprising amount of insight for a guy who is so focused on just artificing.
Me personally, my favorite character in this book.
You got to make sure.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was like, no, he's in the next book. Never mind. No, I'd have to say Loden, just because he's done it, man. He's gotten to that point where he can just do whatever he freaking wants, and everybody will just be like, "Oh, that's a Loden." You know?
That is a special place to be in, just where like all the rest of you can suck it. I'm going to do whatever I want, and he's good enough that he can get away with it without being, well, he can be a bit of a tool sometimes, but he's not a terrible person or tyrant. And V.S. Drake mentions that, you know, he might not be our favorite character, but you love to hate him. Ambrose, the jackass from the very beginning. Oh, sorry, Jackass.
Ambrose Jackass. Did I say Jackass? I meant to say Jackass. I mean Jackass.
Oh man, he's definitely that love to hate character. He plays as a very stereotypical spoiled, rotten, terrible, noble type.
Yeah.
It's not the most inventive character in the world, but he plays a good foil, and I think one of the things that he does best that I like is he brings out, as much as Ari brings out the good in both, he brings out the worst in him. You know, the worst impulses of his own arrogance, because it's going up against the one thing he doesn't have, and that's built-in privilege.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because while Quoth earned his place at the university, he feels Ambrose was given his place at the university.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something that, you know, oil and water, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and he's a part of the Edema Rue, which are more or less seen by the noble cast as, aside from their ability to entertain, being like basically the dredges of society.
Yeah.
And before it runs off of my current chat, I just want to shout out Alpac Phantom mentioned Will and Sim are cool too because of their friendship and kinship with Rolf. And I have to agree. I slightly tend to favor Will over Sim. Sim's great. He's just the kind of affable, nice character who just he cares a lot about his friends and about getting the girl, and that's he's just and yeah, and VS Drake mentions that he's low key, not like basically poor, but doesn't care.
Yeah.
But
I like
I like Will's insight into things, where he's basically just like stop pussyfooting around and do X Y Z.
Yeah, exactly what Phantom said is what I was gonna say. For me, Will and Sim were about even in book one, but in book two, Sim really grew on me. I don't want to get into it because spoilers and stuff, but there is one specific scene where I'm like, all right, Sim's the guy. Like, I wish I was Sim now, you know?
Yeah, and at the risk of getting too far into that too, like I did also have a change of heart in that book. I'm just trying to keep myself in this one, which is kind of difficult because, as we discussed before, this book, the series doesn't read as like individual novels. It reads almost as like one like 1,600-page book.
Yeah.
like, um,
Well, 1600 so far.
so far, yeah. So it's hard to make those distinctions now. I just think in the context of this book, I like Will a little bit better because he was the only person who was willing to give both. He was giving it to him straight. Like one of the few characters who would just call him out on his shit when he wasn't actively trying to also be an asshole.
I
uh,
forget I forget what part it's in, but there is that one scene where um Quoth is sitting with Will and Sim at a table and they're talking about Quoth and Ambrose going back and forth and Will's like, well, kind of, it takes two to fight. Like, you can't tell me that this is all on Ambrose here. Like,
oh man. I'm not sure what character VS Drake is mentioning in the chat. Sivon, like it's not.
oh,
Uh,
the guy who dated Denna briefly.
oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, he's a throwaway character because every guy she dates is a throwaway character, and like except for Ambrose.
I can't remember his name. It's not that. It's um
He disappeared. Where did he go? He disappeared into the background of the story, never to be mentioned again because he didn't do anything special.
he fulfilled his purpose.
Yeah,
Savoy, that's it. Yeah.
yeah, Savoy. Yeah. So speaking of which, uh, we can't talk about this book without talking about the relationship between Kvothe and Denna. Like it is the pivotal love interest in this story from not the beginning, but like the beginning of his reawakening. Anyway, what did you think of her?
So, pardon me, and I'm back. Um,
I was about ready to step in. Wasn't sure how long that was going to last.
just needed to clear the old lungs real quick. uh, I think I think at one point or another, all of us have experienced that moment where we've had a Denna in our lives, where we see somebody and it's like, okay, I'm gonna put you on a pedestal. You are amazing, and I'm going to worship you, but I'm not gonna tell you about it.
And I can't possibly measure up to said pedestal because I am unworthy. Like,
Yeah. So for me, and again to mention the trope about it's Quoth telling his story. Who is Denna really? We see Denna through Quoth's eyes, and Quoth is head over heels for this girl. So taking that, like, I don't know, is Denna really as cool as Quoth makes her sound, or is she actually quite flawed? So
Yeah, and that's another one of those things where I think ultimately there are things he's tweaking. I know I mentioned the embarrassing stuff, but I can't believe I didn't mention this as well. Is it's something that he is telling the way that he saw it, and I don't think there is a distinction to him because, as V.S. Drake said, I can't think of a better word. She's ephemeral. She is this embodiment of everything that he wants in a woman, and while I think a lot of it is true, I think a lot of it is, kind of rose tinted glasses of his. She probably does have her flaws. And there's even ones that, as you read on, like you can kind of pick out. She's a bit overly coy and flighty at times, but I also think a lot of that comes from just the life that she's had to lead in order to survive. And it's not anything that I hold against her as a character. Like I know some people wind up doing with female characters who, have a different man every other story. I think she's a lot more complex than can be whittled down into just what we see from Quoth for sure, though.
yeah,
V.S. Drake mentions a very common theory, one that I somewhat share, is that she's Fae. Makes sense. There is a lot of moon imagery whenever she's around, and the Fae are known to come out in particular in the moonlight, and that's definitely a theory that I've had. I've developed a couple since, but I developed them with details from the next book, so I can't get into it.
I think one of the leading arguments in my mind is there's and I hope it's in the Name of the Wind. there's there's a scene where Quoth is looking for Denna and he ends up at the Aeolian
Mm-hmm.
mouthful there. And he ends up talking to, gosh, I think it was Stanchion
Mm-hmm.
about Denna and about how they've known Denna for a long time at the
Mm-hmm.
Aeolian. And it's like, okay, if Quoth is of a reasonable age to court Denna and he's 15, then how long can Denna have been of an age to be thought of in a romantic light? Like, if she's a reasonable human being, how can people have known her for a long time in a romantic light? So is she just this person who's lived for a long time and for some fey magic reason nobody's noticed that she's been around for 40, 50 years?
Well, and that's, I think, why that's one of the most, like you said, it's one of the more common theories is that it doesn't make sense that because I think there's a point where Quoth pegs her as being no more than a year older than him, which would make her 16. And there's no way a 16-year-old is known in one of these towns when it takes, travel between cities takes weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
And like you said, that she's been of a desirable age, although like if we're talking medieval times it could start getting a little dark and creepy. um,
Rothfuss is pretty chill. He'll keep it PG-13, okay?
but yeah, the fact that she changes names is another thing that helps. Fey magic probably helps her fade from certain people's memories, but not the ones that she actually gets close to, which is probably why in part V.S. Drake, her boyfriends or whatever fade into the background.
Yeah.
Fade as much from other people's minds as from her own.
Yep.
Unless they have something very compelling about them, I guess. So yeah, we're already at like 850. So why don't we start getting into more of like the specific plot points?
Okay.
Because
There,
there's a lot.
there's one thing we have to talk about
Mhm.
because it's quotes life force, the Chandrian.
Yeah, and I think that's where we can start with our plot points. Is like it is actually mentioned in the very beginning story. The Chandrian are the ones who obviously killed his entire family, and they are essentially this world's boogeymen. You know, where most people think they're fake because they're just in children's rhymes, but it turns out by his own experience they are very much real and far worse than the children's rhyme says.
Yeah.
um I
I think that
believe go ahead.
I think that's the question too, is at some point in the book they mention the Chandrian have been around long enough that everybody knows to be afraid of them.
Hmm.
Like everybody knows the bedtime riddle song thing. Everybody knows that they're not real but fear them. So like if Quoth works hard to pump up his reputation to be this super cool hero, awesome person, then what did the Chandrian go through to earn their reputation of feared throughout the world to a point where nobody talks about them?
And I think that's what he's trying to discover in a way, because I think figuring out the answer to that question is ultimately going to lead him to them. Uh, at least that's my little theory on it.
Yeah.
um, because the question of why is a lot of the answer to the question of how, when, where, who. Um, at least in any sort of actionable sense. you
Yeah.
know, uh, so it is really interesting imagery, and it's such a brutal scene when he first meets them too. Like he literally went off to play in the woods and gather some like what sage or something, just or gathering herbs in the woods for his mom, and comes back to an unimaginable horror,
Yeah.
and is only saved because something spooks the boogeyman, which is the
Yeah.
other big question in this: is who spooked the boogeyman? you know.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're gonna have to just wait to find out because obviously it could be a number of things that the book explores.
Mhm,
The Amir, for
mhm.
example.
He
Uh,
also, I think, the leader, Haliax, mentions to Cinder, who protects you from the
the
Amir, the Singers, and I forget what the other one was.
Yeah.
If anybody in the chat remembers what the third one was, there are things he protects them from, and they seem to fear him enough to listen to him as a leader.
Yeah.
But what was it that scared him off? Like that, the scythes. That's the one. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if it's the same spelling, VS Drake, but I believe the scythes is what it was called. Whatever those are, I think the only one that gets a mention in this is the Amir, correct? Um,
Um, so they're all mentioned in the story, but the Amir is the only one that Quoth actively investigates.
yeah, I think you might be right on that one. In either case, I'm curious which of those ones listed, if any of them, it could be something else entirely, were um, the ones that scared them off that night. And if they were the ones that scared them off, is there a reason why they left both just lying there to
Yeah.
go completely mad in the middle of the woods, which is a pretty typical trope, but I like how Rothfuss dealt with it because this is where I can't believe I missed this, but he brings in the doors of the mind and he enters and he enters this door that allows him to sleep and forget, and these are two of the doors, and he completely shuts himself out, which to me, sounds like how we react to traumatic events. It just has a much more tangible name. Now, they don't outright say this is what he does. This is kind of a conclusion that I've come to, is that he shut himself behind those doors, and I think that it was that those doors, he actually became a different person. Like there was kind of like this other self that was walking around for the next 3 years. When what was the town that he was in again? For begging in those years.
Was it
What?
Tarby?
Yeah, the really giant city that you couldn't walk across in a day, even if you tried. Well, anyways, he spent. I think that's why he acted so differently. Why he was so completely different from the self that he portrays throughout the rest of the story until he meets Scarpy, who opens the doors for him with that story. He snapped him out of it by bringing up a story that forced him to face the trauma, to come out of it, and to give him a purpose.
Yeah. To get him to move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the crazy thing is that it seems that was his purpose, because how else does Scarpy know his name without asking for it? Like,
well, I mean, the magic of names, right?
well, yeah, but like, how many people have that magic though? And what is his purpose for specifically seeking him out and giving him a story? And because that's the thing, is you'd have to know the name to know what you're doing with it. And it's more than knowing the name. You have to know what it is, who it is. It's more than just the name, and that's what I think gives it the actual power. And for that to happen, he has to have at least in my mind, I feel like he has to have targeted Kvothe.
Yeah. Scarpy is one of those characters where I think we're waiting for more development, because we know Scarpy comes back around, because in the now it's mentioned that Chronicler knew where Coat was because of Scarpy.
Yeah.
So as
But
of
who
the
is
Name
he?
of the Wind, all we know is he's some storyteller in Tarbean who gets himself locked up, and he somehow knows Quoth's name without knowing who Quoth is. So obviously, there's more to come with Scarpy. But
well, anyways, after he wakes up, this sets up, like you said, the revenge plot. This this pursuit of the Chandrian and the Aemir that drives Quoth to go to the university.
Yep.
And well, obviously, along the way, he meets Denna for the first time. That was one thing I want to quickly bring up, is the amount of foreshadowing in this book is it's almost difficult to follow because there's so much of it going on. And I keep, like, my second read through, I was like, oh, there's an Easter egg. There is an Easter egg. There's an Easter egg if I just paid attention. And one of the things I noticed is that when Kvothe meets somebody important, almost always there is a kind of interaction or something he notices about them that plays out as being important later. His first interaction with Denna is just like she was some dude's wife or something.
Yeah.
Like, passes her by as if she wasn't there, and yet she becomes one of the most important people in the book, at least to him. And I thought that was interesting that she was the only one who didn't get that kind of insight moment at the first meeting.
Well, you get a meta insight because he pauses the story to be like, how do you describe Denna? and then Bast has to be like, She had hair and 2 eyes.
Well, that's another thing.
And her nose was perfect.
Oh, he said it was slightly crooked, actually, and that's another thing that we can do when we can go back to that point where he does embellish certain things. Is like we are seeing it through his eyes, and that's one of the called out embellishments. Is that he sees her as perfect, and yet Bast is able to point out at least a perceived flaw, or it's implied that it's a flaw, but honestly, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah.
So when he does make it to the university, finally, he also parts from her thinking it's going to be forever. And this is where we get to see Koth finally start to fuck up.
Finally start.
Well, I mean, like, it's not stuff that just happened to him. It's stuff that he did to himself, at least in some regards. Obviously, we see his immense talent in being able to get into the university. They usually only let in 17 as the youngest, and he gets in at 15, and they pay him for the first semester.
Less talents.
Yeah, 3 less talents.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's the name of the chapter, is like less talents or something.
Yeah, actually, I believe it is just less talents. It just happens to be 3, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yep, that's very correct.
Yeah. Which
I
know that
Elodin was the previous young student that went through the university at an extremely young age.
Vastrek mentioned that he was at most 14, but he was 12 when his parents died, and he spent 3 years in that city, I believe.
I'm not sure. I know he's 17 in Wise Man's Fear. That's the only age I know for sure.
All right. I mean, I could be wrong too. I just I got the 15 from math. I didn't get it from them from a memory of them outright saying no. Actually, I do remember. He said that Denna was no more than a year older than him when he actually starts to notice her on their ride to Imre.
Mm-hmm.
And he said she was 6. Don't you use math with me? I'll use math whenever I want. BS Drake, bring it on.
You see, the problem is Drake did the math and he came up with 14.
Okay, let's time out on taking shots at our chat here. We've only got a couple of them in there.
Yeah, please don't leave. I'm just kidding. Don't leave.
Oh man. But anyways, back to his time at the university. We see him do a few things that set up innumerable problems for him throughout the story. Where initially he has to show off and be arrogant in front of a teacher who admittedly is being a dick. Hemi or Hem,
Master Hem.
Yeah, Master Hem invites him to teach the class because he thinks he's going to give him what for because he can't actually do anything, and then Kvothe ends up not only doing what is asked but making the Master Hem look the fool. And what
I think that's a very relatable moment, right?
Oh man,
who doesn't want to be like, listen here, you dick?
Well, like, I definitely have had a professor like that who was very much the wait, watch the door, see who's going to be late, and then try and embarrass them type of teacher. And those teachers, frankly, suck. And it does feel justified when he does the things that he does, but I think it also shows the short-sightedness and lack of patience from our main character when he does something that long-term is, you have to know that's going to have consequences when this person literally decides your fate on like a every 2-month basis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at 15, he probably wasn't worried too much about the future at that point. He was more goal driven, right? He wanted to get answers to the Chandrian. He's going to do whatever he needs to do to get them.
But that's the thing. He screwed that up too. By in it, like not much longer after he gets his first whipping from his malfeasance trial or whatever.
Yep.
He ends up
For lighting
going.
him on fire.
What was it? Reckless use of sympathy.
Yep.
And he ends up going into the archives, and now I don't fault him for listening to somebody who's in a position of authority in the archives, but a little sense, dude. Flames around millions of pages of books. Like, that's one of the, I think that might be the one time that I've seen him be, maybe stupid's not the right word. Ben, the guy who originally teaches and mentions that thoughtless, intelligent person is one of the scariest things.
Yeah.
Definitely. BS Drake does make a good point. He was impaired by the drugs slightly, but that's, I think,
mere excuse.
well, I think that might be put to the arrogance a little bit, as thinks he's above the effects of these things, like he can't be affected by them, rather than doing the smart thing and going and resting it off. No, he has to go right to the archives because he can't wait.
He had his goal in hand. He wasn't gonna let some silly thing like common sense stand in his way.
Yeah, exactly, and that I think is one of the things that makes him so frustrated.
I love that quote, fam. Well, what's it to be? I'm to be whipped and admitted to the Arcanum.
Oh man, that is a good line. As much as I hate how smarmy it was, like or how smarmy he can be, that was a well delivered line, and I liked it. And
so I'd like to jump ahead a little bit here in the essence of time. Near the end of the book, he goes on his jaunt over to, what was it, Traben?
Yeah, Traben.
To investigate a sighting of the Chandrian, and he ends up using magic in a kind of questionable way. So Quoth obviously takes the ends justify the means approach to using sympathy in a malfeasance kind of direction. Do you think Quoth's this is the question part. Do you think Quoth is justified in doing whatever he needs to do to be the hero? Or do you think there is a line that he shouldn't cross?
I mean, in general, my philosophy is that everyone has a line that they shouldn't cross, and a lot of it is based on intention and ability, but partially also on experience and wisdom, and those last two are ones that both severely lacks, but he acts as if he has them in spades. And I think that's one of the things that bothers me about him as a character, is he acts like he has all the experience and wisdom in the world. He has a lot of knowledge, he has a lot of ability, and he has some mostly good intentions, if a bit self-interested sometimes. I don't know, like, I think that he does mildly step over the line, not anything irredeemable yet. But I think they're also setting up a character who is willing to do something that most people won't, and that's what's going to need to be done. I'm just hoping that before he gets there, he gains a little bit of that wisdom,
Yeah. I think that's the question, right? Is the university obviously wants the guilders to be people who use sympathy, magic, alchemy, whatever they walk away from the university with. They want those people to use it for like common everyday stuff. They don't want them to go out there and be soldiers. They don't want them to go out there and be heroes. They want them to go out there and invent, create, marvel, and awe.
And
So,
learn.
yeah, and learn. Anyway, but Koth obviously wants to take what he learns from the university and go beat the shit out of Chandrian. So,
Well,
um, obvious. I think to me, is he playing with fire with doing magic to kill the Dracus?
he's definitely playing with fire there. That one, at the very least, felt
Pun intended.
very much intended and well played. That one felt a little more understandable because there was a survival element to it. I mean, some might say that this is kind of a, well, maybe nature should take its course kind of argument, but like that was kind of my life's threatened, the lives of these town people are threatened, and it's a little more understandable, but like you said, he's definitely figuratively and literally playing with fire.
Yeah. I think you see his character defined a little bit when he returns, right?
Oh yeah.
he he doesn't want anybody to know that he was the one who did all that stuff because he knows the professors at the university will be like, "You fucked up. You shouldn't have done that."
Well, at least he learned that lesson. um now he's definitely grown a lot from that experience, hopefully for the better. uh it was interesting though to see that decision right next to the way that he treated Denna right beforehand, and how brutally that blew up in his face.
Yeah,
um,
Phantom. I'm not saying the Dracus magic was malfeasance, but it's definitely outside of what the masters want the Arcanum students to be doing in the world. He used magic to attack something. He definitely didn't attack it directly. He didn't make a moment of the. Actually, no, he didn't. Okay, sorry, I had to replay that scene in my head real quick. He didn't make a moment of the Dracus and stab it through the chest, but he did use magic to bring down that big iron thing off of the church building to smush him flat. And I think that would qualify as using magic to attack.
yeah, and VS Drake mentions that Lauren would probably rule it as malfeasance. The Arcanum has some pretty strict rules, so they probably would rule it malfeasance. There is some gray area, and it feels like the kind of thing. Let's put it this way: it's the kind of thing that had he not been there like 4 other times, I think he probably could have, and had to defend this in front of them. He probably could have talked his way out of it, if it wasn't already like 4 strikes.
Yeah.
Um, but it is definitely riding that line. Uh, they don't really talk about it being used as to save a life, but a lot of the Arcanum talks about kind of this idea of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, where they try and teach students to think ahead before they do and make something so that they don't even wind up in situations where they even have to make that decision. Like when he makes his first sympathy lamp flashlight thing.
Yeah.
Um,
So
they talk about how that could be used by burglars or people with malintent.
So let's ask that question then. Where is the line for good use of sympathy? Sorry, typing it out.
Elpac Panda makes a good point. Is they do imply that it is only against the use of humans, and I think that's why it's acceptable. Why it would be like he could probably work his way out of it. But the fact of the matter is that it's that short step type of thing, preventing your students from even getting to the point where they have to make that decision about using it on a person. So I think it would wind up being like this is their hard line in the sand. And it's just a question of whether or not they make it a hard line with him, or would they make an example of him as a hard line to everybody else? At least that's my take on it.
Now that I'm thinking about it right now, like what Phantom says about humans versus non-humans, Scrael, maybe even Fae, more broadly. I think from the Master's perspective, they want to distance themselves from anything negative about magic.
Mm-hmm.
Where from us sitting here reading the story, thinking about like, all right, good versus evil, I don't know. I think that's a hard line to draw, because I think what he did in Traben was good. He went out of his way to try and stop the Dracus from attacking the town. At the same time, it was also kind of his fault that Dracus was there to begin with.
Yeah, and I'd more or less have to agree with that. I'm not really sure what else him being who he is could have done, because the thing is that if he sees that sort of thing, he's not just going to sit back, because he's learned enough to be able to act, and his whole thing in the beginning was regarding not being able to do something when his parents died. So like he's not going to be he's not set up to be the type of character who's just going to sit back and let something happen. If he can ostensibly prevent tragedy. So whether or not it's okay for him, I don't think he's going to think about it that way. I think he's going to think about it in the context of his own trauma, with maybe some thought to, should I be doing this? But I think
as Quoth, like he probably wouldn't think about it. He's gonna go into a situation, guns a blazing. He's gonna use everything in his arsenal, morality aside. If you ask me, he'll do whatever he needs to do to get out the other side.
And I'm hoping that gets tempered a little bit, or it's going to be that much harder to like the dude. Because, like, I don't know. It's set up to almost be the you live long enough to, you either die or live long enough to see yourself become the villain type of thing. I mean, we kind of already see that having happened. It's just whether or not it's actually true. And I think a lot of that's going to depend on whether or not he learned anything from the situation. But in the context of the Arcanum itself, you're right. They're trying to avoid any even suspicions that magic could do harm. And if you can harm something as huge as a Dracus, what's to stop you from harming a human?
Yeah.
But
obviously, a lot of these questions go more in depth in Wise Man's Fear. So
yeah, yes, they do. And one of the things that I want to kind of talk about a little bit more, I know I mentioned a bit before, was the foreshadowing that goes on throughout this book. There are a couple instances, and I'm bringing this up now because they kind of lead into the Wise Man's Fear, and that's, we're getting towards the end of our plot discussion. What sorts of foreshadowing really stood out to you that either came to fruition in this book, or that you hope come to fruition, or for us, no come to fruition in the next books. And this is a question to our chat as well. So, like, what types of
What foreshadowing stood out?
foreshadowing? Yeah, what foreshadowing stood out to you?
So to answer your question, Alex, I think the big hit you in the face one is the name of the series, King Killer Chronicles. He's got to kill a king at some point.
True. V.S. Drake mentions the Denner resin being big, and it definitely is. It's huge. If nothing else, it's a foreshadow of what happens with the Dracus, but it does have the potential to be something even bigger. And how that would play out, I'm not exactly sure. Like, is there like a much bigger, like he finds the workings of what looks like a drug trade setup, like a la Walter White, um, you know, but it almost seems like that could be something bigger. I don't know if if it is, or if I would even want it to be linked to the Chandrian, but I actually think my favorite bits of foreshadowing were not necessarily the ones that were blatant, like the King Killer. Some of them were a little bit more subtle. A bit with the Denner resin. I actually saw that also a little bit foreshadowing Denna, because she is an addiction for Kvothe, along with music and whatever, music and knowledge and things like that. So that kind of ties in. But I also noticed that he does it with a lot of stuff. He sets up Andros with that one noble's bratty son, who winds up that Kvothe steals his new clothes from before he goes to Imre. You know, that guy's his dad's loot breaking a little bit. But you know,
Loot. That took me a second. Loot.
yeah, so he sets up a lot of these little things, these little Easter eggs that come out throughout there. And there's some, I think some of the more interesting ones for me are the ones that haven't been resolved yet. Like one of the ones that maybe I'm just hyper focusing on it, but when he's in that town where he's not himself, he's about to freeze to death, and the person who saves him is in a demon mask. I forgot what the demon's name is. It starts with an E.
Incantus.
Yeah, Incanus. It's the demon who saves him, not Telu.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, is there something more to the Chandrian than meets the eye, in particular with Haliax, who is presumably the an embodiment of Incanus? You know, is there something more to the demons that we know? Obviously, some of the Chandrian do terrible freaking things, but well, V.S. Drake brings up what was eventually going to be my point: is Haliax is probably on some level a good guy, or at least keeps them in more check than they would if he weren't there. You know,
To devil's advocate this. So if you think about it, at the beginning, when Quoth is with his family and the Edema Ru are traveling, he's starting to show his genius and learn sympathy, but he's kind of trapped because he's with his family. He's going to grow up to be a Edema Ru. He's going to grow up to be a great ludist. He's going to grow up in the troop. The Chandrian come around and free him from that. In an extremely twisted and dark way. They free him from his life of boredom, essentially. And then again in Tarbeen, he ends up in a life of squalor, and the demons again come and save him from that life of squalor.
Well, yeah, they give him enough breathing room to meet Scarpy, who's actually the one who, knocks a little sense into him with his story. But it's ostensibly kind of the same thing, and it just makes me wonder: is there something bigger that we're going to learn? Because one of the things that after reading this book, I read some reviews about it, and in the few negative reviews that I found, one of the common issues that people would bring up is that there's a lack of a complex villain. Like, you have your Andros, but he's pretty much, thinks his farts don't stink and thinks he can rule the world through intimidation and money, and more or less he can, at least in the context of the book. But and then you have the Chandrian, who are very stereotypical, face it in the shadows, dark eyes, blue fire, everything's rotting around them, like these literal embodiments of everything you think of as evil. And I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because of these little hints that Rothfuss is putting in. And that's the kind of foreshadowing that I like. It's subtle, makes you think, and at least adds a little complexity in a story that doesn't allow for as much complexity as something that's not being told by a character whose end we already know. Well,
All right. So with that, let's lead into the end here.
Yeah.
Final thoughts. Did you enjoy the book?
We're not going to talk about the quick final scene where he calls the name of the wind.
Nah, that's like minor. It's barely even. How did you feel that moment when he called the name of the wind?
Dude, that was so cathartic when he finally got it. Like, honestly, it was very satisfying, at least for me.
It wasn't satisfying at all for me. Because think about it. He went through this giant journey all because he wanted naming magic. And what finally gets him there? He gets pissed off at Ambrose. Like, that could have happened anytime. He could have gotten pissed off anywhere. Like,
well, I mean, I think what made it worthwhile to me, though, was that it was the closest thing we got to a resolution that tied something together in the first book. Andros got some comeuppance. He got to know the name of the wind, and it's not like that's the end all be all. Like, just because you do something once, it needs to be repeatable. Like, he, spoiler alert, learns a little bit more about this stuff in the next book. It sets that up, and it was, at least for me, satisfying to see it in action and to see what it's like to I think actually what really made it satisfying was seeing what it was like experiencing it through both eyes, to know what it's like, not just somebody telling you what happens, but what the experience is actually like when you name the wind.
Yeah. I will say, Rothfuss did an amazing job of writing that part. Like, that was it sucked you in, and it made you feel like, this is stupid, but yeah, Ambrose deserves it.
And the thing is you're sitting there knowing that it's gonna, despite how satisfying it was, it's gonna be just a repeat of what happened with the Jackass song. It's going to wind up biting him in the butt again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning, by the way, K Rock. I hope that we haven't spoiled too much for you. And yeah, definitely look out for the foreshadowing. If you see anything you like, mention it on the YouTube in the comment section.
Yeah, definitely. What besides the naming of the wind, obviously you liked the book.
Mm-hmm.
When you finished it, were you like, oh my gosh, where's Wise Man's Fear? Let me jump right into this shit. Or were you like, yeah, it was good, I'll be excited to think about this more? did you immediately go on to Google and be like, fan theories, King Killer Chronicles?
Well, one thing we haven't mentioned, and I feel like we have to do the shout out, is this book is actually the spark that wound up producing this very show. It was a
Yep.
discussion between me and you talking about this book. So I had already dove into fan theories as I was like finished, as soon as I had finished, but literally 5 minutes after finishing The Name of the Wind, I was listening to The Wise Man's Fear. Like, no waiting, and I was doing both. And it's one that I would highly recommend to people, but you have to realize that this, I don't think you can treat it as a standalone novel. You have to treat it as a part of a series and one that's not done. And it's going to be frustrating as hell when you get to the end of The Wise Man's Fear, because you want the next book to be out now, and it's not yet, at least not as of this stream.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the structure of the book kind of lends favor to that, is because it doesn't feel like a complete story. You're like, well, what happens next?
Give me more, give me more.
But one thing, my final thoughts on this too is, this book is the embodiment of sucking you in and letting you escape to a whole new world. Uh, I love all of the world building that Rothfuss does. I love the relatability of all the characters, and I love that, like, you can just pick a point in the book and read it, and it's entertaining. There's not really a point in this book where I was like, like, all right, let's move on. Come on, let's go. It's all interesting, and that's something that I love in a book, and I love in a book that I can come back to and read over and over and over again.
And I think that's why I brought up that it was a storyteller's story. Is it's something that keeps you engaged. It tells little stories within it, and even when the characters are telling stories about other characters telling stories, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And he even does a couple parts where he's able to take something that the storyteller is telling some story about somebody who's telling a bad story and still makes the bad story interesting. Like, and the ability to do that, keep it straight, keep it interesting, and keep you coming back is phenomenal. And it's why I too fell in love with this book and a lot of the characters. I love the emotionality of it and my ability to sink into the feelings and the experiences of the characters, see the world through their eyes, like Adam has mentioned a few times. His ability to build the world through his characters, I think, is up there with some of the best. And I would highly recommend this to anybody, even if you wind up not liking the main character. I don't think that's, he might be the protagonist, but I don't think that's necessarily something that you have to have. And like, I'm okay with not liking him all the time.
He does a good job of exploring story without it being, you have to like Quoth.
Yeah. Because he does give you other characters to like. I don't think anybody mentioned both as being their favorite character. and yet he's the one who moves the story along. And I'm actually kind of glad he's the one telling the story, because a storyteller telling a story makes it entertaining,
Yep.
Like, yeah,
like the V.S. Drake mentioned the stories that get told about Quoth in the Tavern of Coat. It's really interesting to hear, like, and that's something I don't know if it's accurate because I've never experienced it in real life, but something I think Rothfuss did an amazing job with is taking the drama of real life stories, getting boiled down into these stories that people tell each other and changed because people lost details along the way. Like, those cool little stories that get told are entertaining and really, really neat, and add an extra little flavor to the book.
Yeah, and it gives you something to compare other people telling stories to, both telling them as well. So it has layers to what it adds to the story, and I like that. V.S. Drake also asked a good question: is Quoth the hero or anti-hero at this point? I don't think he's either. At this point, he is just a man on a mission.
Well, I think the Traben incident sets him up to be a hero. Whether
Yeah,
or not he'll live up to being a hero is in question.
yeah, it does set him up to be one. I just don't think he is. That was everything else. Everything every time he has acted heroically, it has been because something stood between him and his goal.
Yeah, I would
He does
say
choose the heroic role more often, but there is also this idea that he's just kind of doing his own thing. So he's not quite the anti-hero yet either.
I think you gotta ask yourself, is a hero somebody who does heroic things, or is a hero somebody who does selfless things?
Yeah,
Because Quoth does not do selfless things.
yeah, I don't,
Everything he does is for him, in my opinion.
at least on some level. There might be small actions that are selfless, but ultimately serve a greater purpose, which is his mission or him. I mean, he might not be thinking that's what he's doing, but that's where it winds up going. And LPAC Phantom makes a good point. Everybody thinks they're the hero of their own story, but that's just kind of
Even the Dracus part, like Quoth didn't do it because he saw a passing Dracus wreaking havoc. He did it because he felt like it was his own fault.
mhm. It was to ease his own burden of guilt.
Yeah.
And like, also, I don't want to get too far into like, is there any such thing as a selfless act? But I don't think it's in his nature not to, on some level, think about himself. But I think part of that just comes from the fact that for 3 years, that's what he had to do to live, and that's he's not that far removed from it. He's like, what, a year removed from it at the Dracus incident at most.
Yeah.
Yeah, a year and a half
Like
maybe.
semesters
Yeah,
and
so he's not that far removed from having spent his whole life having to look out for himself. So will that manifest even more concretely, or become a part of the way he deals with the world, or will he learn to let that go? And that's something we're gonna have to see in the future books. And it'll be
I will say there is that moment where he goes back to Nope, that's Wise Man's Fear. Just kidding.
I think the closest, in my opinion, that he comes to it is some of his interactions with Ari. Now, I know a lot of that is done so that he can get access to the archives from the secret doors in the Underthing.
Although that wasn't his initial intent with Ari.
Yeah, his initial intent, though, like you mentioned, is just to connect with her, and I think that's one of the reasons why I like her as a character, is in part because she brings out this safe, comforted side of Quoth, where he is not always constantly thinking about himself. Like, and she does it just by being this character that is purely herself and sees the world in such a unique way. And anyways, that was a really long final impressions, but
we kind of got sidelined talking about
we
the
could go on for days
hero
about this book,
here.
but unfortunately we got to start wrapping it up. So
Any last thoughts, Alex?
um I definitely recommend, if you haven't read Wise Man's Fear, get right into it, but just brace yourself for the fact that there's not a third book yet, man. Like, what about you, Adam? Anything?
It's good. Both books are extremely entertaining, even without a third book. Like,
This is true.
If Rothfuss got on his Twitch today and was like, "Guys, I've made up my mind. I'm throwing Doors of Stone in the trash. It's over," I wouldn't hate the first two books. I'd still reread them. I'd still get entertainment out of them. I'd be like, oh, but at the same time, it wouldn't diminish the first two books.
I'm gonna be real. I'd be searching fanfic from then on. Like, I'm gonna finish the book for him. Like, and can they do a decent job? Because it would be tough. It's tough to capture that voice, you know. But like, yeah. I agree. It's they are good enough that I don't regret it if they were to be on their own in any way. But yeah, there will be at least 4 books. But like, just the next book, I think, is more of the point that I was making.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, I think those are my final thoughts. Is Doors of Stone.
Well, let's talk next book then. The poll closed almost an hour ago.
Oh shit.
So the next long book, that's right, DM's Taylor, the next long book
is going to be
Dawn by Octavia Butler, and that'll be January 2nd.
So looking forward to that. She's a legend. Can't wait to read that one.
I have not heard of her or the book, so this will be an all new one for me.
I have heard of her. I have not read the book, so it will also be relatively new to me. I have read, I think, an excerpt from one of her books, and I can't remember which one. It was a while back, but it was good. And from everything I've heard, she's a can't-miss author when it comes to the sci-fi fantasy genre.
Yes. Also, the January 2nd session will be a unique one because it's going to be Alan and Alex instead of Adam and Alex.
Why you leave me?
Yeah. So, for those of you who know me personally, know that I'm going to have a new child soon. So, I might be out for a couple of streams. Yeah. But don't forget, we're also doing The President's Brain is Missing on December 19th at 8 p.m.
That is our short story for the month. So yes. Even if you don't think you have a lot of time, I'm sure you can finish it.
It is not a political book. I know it has president right in the title, but I've been assured by the suggester that it is not political at all.
Yeah, it's like when people call Die Hard a Christmas movie.
Merry Christmas.
Shots fired. I know people who are going to take that very personally.
So, December 19th, President's Brain is Missing. January 2nd, Dawn. Check them out and join us. If you want to hit us up on our socials, we got Facebook at The DM's Table and Twitter at DM's Table. Check us out. We say cool things sometimes. We talk about this show a lot on there. And if you want an invite to our Discord so you can chat with us more about books or other nerdy subjects, you can hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, and we'll get you that link over to our Discord. We do chat about at least once a day. We have some sort of conversation on there. It's pretty neat. If you want to have a say on what book we read next, join Patreon. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/DM's Table. You'll get some cool stuff. Primarily for the 800s, you get to vote on what book we read. We'll pitch.
There may be more stuff later down the road.
Yeah, that's the cool thing for the 800s. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, YouTube. Check out our YouTube channel for other cool videos, as well as this video and any other book series that we've done. Yeah, and Alex, if you want to talk about some cool themes that we're going to introduce.
Yeah, now that we have kind of established our stream a little bit more, one of the things we want to look forward to is we're planning on doing some theme months. I say months because we're only getting in a short story in a book about a month, but we're going to start this in February. We're going to start in honor of Black History Month. We're going to be doing all Black authors. And then the same thing for Women's Month in March. And if there's any other themes that you would like to see, hit us up and look for our Discord, or join Patreon, and you can have some input there as well. We won't have a theme every month, but we do want to kind of make sure that we are getting all different types of books in. And so for now, start thinking about the kinds of books you'd like to see on our list for voting. You don't have to be a patron to do that. So anybody who has ideas for books that might fit into those months, let us know. Best way to do it, though, is to hit us up on Discord.
Well, Discord.
Well, to get the Discord and then tell us there, or to comment on YouTube.
But yeah, definitely let us know what books we should be reading, and we'll check them out, especially if it's with our themes. But yeah, so I think that's about it for us tonight.
Thank you, everybody, for contributing.
Yeah, we really appreciated chatting with you guys tonight about the Name of the Wind. Wrong book.
Yeah, and double down on letting us know if you have ideas. You can do Twitter and Facebook too. We got to plug those doubly as well. Anyway, but yeah, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We went long because we love this book. It's a long one, but if if you want to have a much more manageably sized book, again, Patreon, vote for what you want to see next.
or just suggest one to us, and then hope the patrons pick it.
Agree.
Yeah, I think that's it for us tonight.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone.
Okay.